Since the coronavirus is on everybody's mind and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm reporting from Washington State, epicenter of this pandemic, let's talk about how not to panic, how to be prepared, and exactly what's going on here. Thank you for watching. This is We the Governed, and I'm Glenn Morgan. Now, this is a video that I don't usually produce, something like this, basically don't panic. But because the coronavirus is in the news today and this is all anybody is talking about, I have been asked, I've had a lot of emails, I've had phone calls, I've had comments. People want me to have some commentary on this subject. And part of it's because in my earlier life, I was involved in doing pandemic preparation when I did some product development work in the 2004 to 2007 range, trying to create disaster kits for the CDC and other healthcare facilities, including disposable ventilators that were kind of single-use ventilators to keep somebody alive in some kind of a pulmonary type of disease. At the time we were worried about SARS or H1N1, not so much coronavirus, but there were other types of diseases that exist out there that would require you to have mechanical ventilation. And I had a lot of contacts in the healthcare field, pulmonologists and respiratory therapists and others that I had worked with at the time to do all these studies and product development work. And so I want to talk a little bit about the coronavirus issue in Washington State and just some basic common sense stuff, I hope, that we can all agree to consider as we move forward in what I think is probably just the early stages of this process. Now, one thing I want to always remind everybody about, and I've talked about this before, and this is kind of a conservative perspective on life, which is that always be prepared. I know that's the Boy Scout motto, and it's a great motto actually, but it's something that most people should have in their life anyway. It's a good idea. Be prepared. Have a plan to protect you and your family in case there's some kind of an event, or it could be an earthquake, it could be a volcano. We live in Washington State. We have had volcanoes blow up in the last 40 years here. When Mount St. Helens went up, things can happen, and they're gonna happen when you least expect it. So always have some kind of a plan to be prepared, be self-reliant. And there's good reasons for this. This is not a selfish activity. It's selfish in the sense you're trying to help yourself and your family, but this is for the community good. It does help you, but it helps everyone else, because if you are self-reliant, this means that you don't need to be a drag on the resources in the community when something does happen, and you don't have to be one of those people going down to the local Walmart to riot over toilet paper. And I think that this is very important to remember. It's not just about you. It's about you not being a burden on the community when something bad does happen. And the other thing is that if you are not a burden on the other people in your community, if you're not a burden on the services, it means that in a terrible event, when some kind of event like this happens, that you are in a position that you can actually help your neighbors or help others who may be in distress or have other problems. This is just rational and logical. Unfortunately, I think in modern times, we've lost a little bit of this perspective. It's almost like a generational loss that we've had, and where the average citizen doesn't tend to think of things this way. And yet it's a good way to live, and it's a prudent way to live, and it's better for the whole community if more people lived like that. Now, it doesn't mean you need to bunker up. You don't have to go into full apocalypse mode. You don't have to prepare for the Walking Dead scenarios that might exist out there. But at the end of the day, even if the reason why if you decide you want to build a bunker and you want to fill it with food and all kinds of stuff to survive the apocalypse, great. That doesn't hurt anybody else. Where I live, there's a lot of people that follow Jay-Z Knight, and they believe in an ancient Lemurian warrior spirit named Ramtha, who's traveled 35,000 years through space and time to warn them about a lizard people invasion. And that's helped convince thousands of people in Thurston County to prepare for the impending apocalypse of some kind. That's okay. I don't care really what the reasons are. They're prepared. They don't have to rely on government to somehow help them through tough times. Whatever the reasons or the justifications for being prepared, they're prepared. And that's a good thing in the community, I think. I certainly don't buy into the Ramtha story myself, but whatever it is that has caused you to get to the point where you want to be prepared, I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the community. And the one thing to remember about this situation that we're in right now is I don't believe this COVID-19 or this coronavirus that has come out of China, that this is the big one. When I was doing this planning back in 2004 to 2007, we were substantially more concerned about a scenario where a respiratory disease like this would actually have about a 10% fatality rate, and it looks like this is going to be a lot lower than that. And I don't mean to dismiss the significance of what's happening right now in our society and across the world, but it's not the concern that we had had when we were looking at some of these at least a number of years ago. And I want to point out something here that people have to remember that make it a lot easier to survive this kind of a situation, and that is that we mostly have power, we have water for the most part, and we have basic services. You know, the roads are still working. This isn't a massive, nationwide earthquake that just wiped out all our services and people are, camping out in their backyards. Generally, you're able to quarantine in place or social distance yourself in a relative comfort. I mean, you're able to surf the internet, you're able to watch Netflix, binge on Netflix forever. There's a lot of downside. It is not fun to lose your job. It is not fun to have this kind of disruption going on, but it could be a lot worse. And frankly, every model that I'd ever worked on was a lot worse than the one, at least what I'm seeing right now, what's been reported to us. There is plenty of food and particularly plenty of toilet paper out there. You really don't have to go and riot and rush the store and stock up on some extreme level fighting each other. If you had wanted to stock up, the best thing would have been able to do it over time in some small increments where it wouldn't have had this kind of an impact. And if you feel like you have to go and do that now, I think I'd rethink what you're doing, because the reality is America actually exports food, and we produce our own toilet paper here. We don't have to import food. We don't have to import any of the components that make food or that go into the food production process for the most part, and we certainly make plenty of toilet paper here. So there might be some challenges short term in some of the distribution models, but currently all the plans are to have all these stores open. No plan that I have seen or that's even been discussed is talking about shutting down these stores. Now, if you don't want to go out to the stores all the time, I don't blame you, and that's a good idea. Get enough that you can stay at home. Remember, be prepared. But I wouldn't panic about this right now, because the reality is it sounds like they're really ramping up a lot of this production and getting this food out to everybody. And you're very likely to be making bad decisions right now if you're panicking. Where we really do need to focus, and I think that it's important to do this, is to focus on those who are most at risk, which appears to be the 70 plus kind of grandparents, or older great-grandparents in some cases, and some of the people who really do need protection, because based on the way this disease seems to be hitting people, those are the people most at risk. It doesn't mean that younger people can't be harmed by this disease, but the numbers seem to be very small, and they at that level, and they seem to be much higher at the older demographic, and particularly those who are already compromised because they're taking chemotherapy or they have diabetes or some other problem. We need to work together as a community to help them. That's the most important thing that I think we can do, and that's very productive. All the models that I remember working on actually were talking about disease, death rates that were really bad across the whole spectrum of ages. And the fact that we can actually target a group of people that we can protect and watch right now is a good thing, as scary as that might be for them. And helping the most vulnerable in our community to this disease, I think is a high priority. I'll give you an example. Just over the weekend, my family and I went out and helped deliver food boxes where there was about a week's worth of food and toiletries and other odds and ends that we delivered to people who fit this category, who were older, who would otherwise have to go out to the store. Just as in an effort, we delivered outside their door. They could come and get it. And this way, they didn't have to leave. They didn't have to shop. It allowed them to isolate themselves in a safe way, so that they didn't have to worry about catching the disease. I mean, that's a practical thing that perhaps you can do with your family or in your community to help others. Perhaps your neighbor fits this category. Maybe you could do some shopping for them if you have to go to the store. Just something like this is common sense. This isn't about panicking. This is just trying to find solutions to the problem that exists before us. It is rational and logical, and this is what you keep hearing in the news, to flatten the curve of infection rate, the infection rate of the disease. We want to spread the number of people who are inevitably going to get this disease. We want to spread the sick out, especially the acute care people, the people who are particularly sick. We want to spread it out over a longer period of time. The reason for that is that the hospitals can only take so many people at once. Over a period of time, because this looks like, when I was, at least the latest reports I've seen, you might be in the intensive care unit for a week to 2 weeks at the most, and those are the beds with ventilators and the ability to help people breathe and help them survive the disease. Those are the people who need the most attention and the most care. And what we don't want is 1,000 people descending all in one day on a facility. We want them to be spread out over a decent length of time, as many months as we can get it, so that we're able to actually give everybody the best standard of care we can. So when they talk about the flattening the curve, that's really what they're talking about, trying to resolve. The other benefit that we have of spreading this out over time is that it allows them more time, them being the manufacturers, to make more ventilators. And I mentioned to you that I was involved in developing a disposable ventilator myself a number of years ago. They have better ones than the version that I was looking at designing now. And they're trying to ramp up manufacturing. It's very logical. They have about 180,000 ventilators right now. They think they can produce another 40 or 50,000 pretty quickly. And every 100 or 1,000 of these ventilators that they get and they can distribute around the country, those are going to be there to help save people. So by stretching this out longer, flattening that curve, they're going to save a lot of lives. So this is a very logical, these are reasonable objectives and goals, and it makes a lot of sense. And so there's a graphic here that kind of explains this a little bit more, where all you're trying to do, it's actually probably the same number of people that end up getting the disease. You're just simply spreading it out over a longer period of time. And this just allows the healthcare system to be able to adapt. In other places around the world where we've had relatively high mortality rates, I think a lot of this is because so many people rushed all at one time, and so the facilities that they had there just got overwhelmed. America has some great intensive care units all around the country. They're really much more advanced now than they've ever been, and the skills of the people who work there tend to be very high. So they can handle saving a lot of lives all at one time, but they can only save so many at once. And so we really want to make sure that the number of people who are coming, that they have the ability to handle that. So let's talk about some of the policies that do make sense. Social distancing, which we've discussed about, that's going to help slow the spread. Drive-through testing, and this I think is important because it's easy to kind of make fun of it. It sounds like driving through for a burger, but actually drive-through testing makes a lot of sense. Would you rather be in your car isolated from other people who may or may not be sick, or if you're sick, to be isolating yourself from other people so you're not getting them sick, to be tested? Or would you rather be standing in a waiting room with dozens or maybe hundreds of other people, some of whom definitely are sick, and make sure everybody there gets it? I mean, this is logical. The drive-through testing is a really brilliant way of being able to community test for this disease and to see just how far spread it is. I've heard that they are setting up one of these facilities in Burien. They're setting them up probably throughout Washington State and elsewhere in the country. I think this is a good idea. It's a brilliant way of doing widespread testing and at least getting to the point where we can determine just how widespread the disease is. A lot of this is going to be about modeling now and trying to reduce how many people get it. The other thing is making sure that you support healthcare workers and people who are really on the front lines of the system. This is, I think, very important, and it's something that we should do just as community members. The people who are on the front line are going to be relatives of mine and probably relatives of yours and other people you know who are nurses. They deal with intake. They might work in pharmacies. These people are on the front line. They're going to be dealing with sick people all day long, or people who think they're sick, or certainly all kinds of chaos is going to be going on. They need our help and our support. And if they're your neighbors, try to help them out, watch their houses while they're gone. They're going to be working double shifts. I mean, really try to help out in the community. This is very important. This is the kind of thing that anybody can do, and find out where, just if they live near you, try to help them. If they're your family members, make sure their lawns get mowed. I don't know, any of the distractions. If they need health care or child care, help watch their kids, whatever it is you can do to come together as a community to help them, I think that that's important. Again, don't panic. This is about just finding ways to help others who live with us and who live in our community. Now let's talk about stupid activity. I'm going to say that I never, under any of the models that I had ever seen, would have imagined people going into a near riot mode over a lack of toilet paper at their local store. That is not the scenario that I ever remember considering. It's not one that I would have considered looking forward. And so in some ways, the toilet paper roll has kind of become the iconic image of this whole coronavirus situation. And it is a little bit on the absurd side. Yes, I do understand why you'd want to make sure you have a supply of that at home. I can't believe that so many people were running out that they all had to rush the store, that they would clear out a full truckload every single day at Costco. But whatever the reason is, that is not the reason for you to go in panic mode and have a fisticuffs or near riot at your local store. That's very absurd. And this is another example of how panic produces poor behavior. Same with any of these other food items for the most part. Even if you don't have the exact type of food that you wanted, that type of brioche roll that you were looking for, that type of cheese, there's going to be plenty of food available for most people. Nobody's going to be starving. You may have to change exactly what type of food you're going to eat, but if you'd been prepared, you would have already had plenty of that on hand. So just kind of go with the flow, don't panic, and realize that we are in the largest food producing country in the history of mankind, that we literally produce the food for the rest of the country. I'm on the board of the Farm Bureau. I'm pretty familiar about this. We have plenty of food. It may take a little while sometimes to deal with some of the hiccups in distribution, but for the most part, make sure that you don't panic over that. The other thing that's obviously a poor choice is if you're younger and you think, hey, I can party because this disease isn't going to affect me. That is a very selfish and poor choice of decisions to make, because you may not get sick in a way that you'd even notice, but you could bring that home and give it to your grandparents, you could give it to your neighbors who are elderly. That's not a good choice. Again, just try to use some common sense. Don't panic, but at the same time, don't go out and do stupid things. Life is going to be a lot easier for everybody if we just avoid doing those types of things. And I want to point out, you can be prepared. And I don't care how poor you are, you can be prepared. You can have plenty of resources on hand so that you don't go out and immediately need to be a burden on your community or your neighbors. This is a photo, I just use this photo here, so that's me with my father. In the 70s at our house in what's now Newcastle, Washington. We had a little rural farm at the time, and you can see behind us is a window there. We actually had plastic on the windows and a piece of plywood for our door for a while. We were not wealthy. Rich people don't live this way, and we certainly didn't. But I can tell you that if had something gone down and we didn't have access to the grocery stores for a few weeks, or more realistically back then, probably even a few months, we would have been just fine. Yes, we were poor, but we generally found ways of always having some extra food on hand. We did can ourselves. Back then, it wasn't as cool as it's become now. We had our own chickens, so we had eggs. I mean, there's just different things that we did to make sure that we always had enough food on hand. I think sometimes it's generational, again, because my grandparents were that way too, and it was just how we lived. Now, this is easier to do if you live rurally than if you live in the city, but still, no matter how poor you are, you could still afford a few cases of top ramen in the closet in case you really needed to have some food like that. You'd probably even be enough room for some toilet paper rolls there if you needed it. And at least try to have enough supplies on hand for a few weeks so you don't have to panic. If you go up to the store and they're out, you can come back another day and they'll have some at that point in time. This is just common sense stuff. I know they've recommended this for hurricanes or earthquakes or fires or power outages or snowstorms, but just whatever you think you can assemble and make it logical things that you can use, that you can store for some period of time. Don't be like the lady that we saw at the grocery store the other day buying 12 heads of lettuce all at once. That's foolish. That 12th head of lettuce is going to go bad just as fast as the first one. You're probably only going to have time to eat one of those heads of lettuce before the rest go bad. Just store things that make sense, store stuff you're actually going to eat, and store stuff you actually need. And anybody can do that. And also, a good plan, I think, is just to get to know your neighbors and have some kind of a coordination with your neighbors. Find out which of your neighbors are, sick, or they have other health needs or some other problems, or they have particular skills that's beneficial. And if you have some sort of a loose, doesn't have to be official, but some kind of a plan to get through a tough time, then I think that you're going to be much less likely to panic, much less likely to have bad outcomes, and I think that'd be good for everybody. Now, to remember, as a critic of government and somebody who's studied government for a long period of time, I don't believe in being dependent upon government for the well-being of my family. And I'd suggest that most people out there shouldn't do that either. Government is here for a reason. I don't believe in no government. I just believe that relying on them to help take care of you is a big mistake, and it's a recipe for some kind of problem in the future. However, they're always going to overreact to crises like this. And part of the reason why that's the case is that there's a low political cost. There's a low political cost to overreact. You can always go back and say, listen, I went a little too far, but I was trying to save lives, or whatever happens like that. And I think government's probably overreacting in some cases around the country. We'll see as the next couple weeks continue. It is foolish and terrible for government to try to say you can't have firearms. That's really a terrible choice beyond the fact that it's unconstitutional, because we want people to be able to protect themselves. It's not realistic to think that the police are going to be able to be everywhere in this kind of a crisis. Secondly, I think that government really, they're advising you that you can't, at least in Washington State, that you can't have social gatherings. But the reality is the governor probably doesn't actually have the authority to come and say, you can't get together with 20 of your friends to decide how you're going to vote this next year, or have a political meeting, or go to church. They really can't enforce that. There's good reasons to have social distancing, but if you can safely do so and get together, I really don't think they can actually stop you from doing that. I think that the one thing to remember about this is that the government's always going to take credit for all the success. When we come out of this thing, I guarantee you, I promise you this, every single elected official is going to talk about how the actions they took helped save your life, or help protect your family, or help protect the community. Whether or not they did, that's what they'll do. And if there's any failures, they're going to blame somebody else. It's the nature of politics. It's human nature. It's the way things go. So those of you out there who, like me, are probably seeing poor choices and dumb choices being made by local government, or even the national government in some cases, just recognize that this is the way things go, and that there's always a political calculation that goes along here in addition to them trying to do the right thing, because I think the intentions generally are going to be pretty good. There's really not a lot of political downside for them to go a little bit too far. We still, though, have to pay attention and ensure that they cause the least amount of harm possible in our community in an effort to actually solve this problem. So it is still worthwhile, even in a situation like this, where unfortunately some members of our community do seem to be panicking a little bit. But even in cases like this, where government will probably overreact, we still need to keep an eye on things, pay attention to what they're doing, calmly proceed with logical, rational steps to help our family, help ourselves, help our neighbors, and help our communities get through this. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more, go to wethegovern.com. Don't panic, and remember, please stay safe out there.